Tonight on NewsWatch, 3 years of fighting. A look at the deadly Syrian civil war.
Plus, what happened to Flight 370? More theories emerge as the search for the missing Malaysian plane continues.
And how cyber terrorism could pose the biggest threat to the American economy. All this and more tonight on NewsWatch. Good evening. I'm Mark Martin.
And I'm Wendy Griffith. This weekend marks the 3rd anniversary of Syria's civil war.
What began as isolated protests against the Assad government has become what some are calling the worst humanitarian crisis in modern times. John Waggy has more.
Early in 2011, while seeds of the Arab Spring were germinating, signs of Syrian uprisings, protests against the country's dictator, President Bashar Assad, began to appear on YouTube. Those protests would mushroom into a full-scale 3-year civil war with staggering costs. More than 140,000 dead and at least a third of the country's 23 million people forced to flee their homes. Millions of refugees are now living in camps in Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. Syria is rated one of the world's most dangerous places for children, and thousands have been murdered. The war also helped produce chaos in U.S. foreign policy.
To use potential weapons of mass destruction on civilian populations crosses another line, and that is going to be a game changer.
One result, reduced U.S. influence in the Middle East and allied skepticism that America will make good on its commitments. Assad resurfaced in Damascus this week, a sign he's not overly worried by threats from Europe and Washington. In the meantime, radical Islamists in the Syrian opposition, some tied to al-Qaeda, make life dangerous for Christians and other Syrian minorities. They held a group of Orthodox nuns hostage for months, recently letting them go after receiving a ransom. The rebels also have attacked historic Christian towns, targeting churches and monasteries. In the town of Raqqa, they're forcing Christians to convert to Islam, pay a tax, or, quote, face the sword. Many Christians have died, and thousands, such as Nicholas George, have fled.
Because of the fighting, everyone in my area was stuck inside their house. They could not buy anything. It was very dangerous for me even to try to open my shop.
Diplomats meeting in Europe have tried to forge an agreement between the warring factions, but plumes of smoke rising in Syrian cities signal that the end to the crisis is not at hand.
If you were, I think, a Christian father in Syria looking at your children and their future, I think you'd want them to get out, and not just now for safety, but for the future too. I think you'd be saying, go to Europe, go to America.
John Waggy, CBN News.
For more on this, we turn now to Tony Badran. He's a research fellow specializing in Syria at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Tony, is there any end in sight to the civil war in Syria?
This seems to be a protracted conflict, especially in the absence of a decisive interference. The regime has outside supporters on its side. However, that has not seemed to have tilted the battle decisively in its favor. It's making some incremental gains in certain areas. On the opposition side, however, there has been no decisive outside factor to help push it in the opposite direction.
Tony, the Assad regime has used chemical weapons on its own people, as you know. Should the world, including America, be doing more to stop the Syrian government?
Without question. I mean, this is a regime that has used all kinds of illegal methods of warfare against its own people, mind you, not against an outside enemy, from chemical weapons to indiscriminate bombing of civilian neighborhoods to starvation. There is no question that the West has talked a big game but has done relatively little to nothing to actually support those on the other side, because it really doesn't have yet, I don't think, a clear end game of what it wants to see in Syria. It says it wants the Assad regime out, but then also it says that it wants to have some continuity in the so-called institutions of the state, which really don't exist anymore. So there's really a lot of strategic confusion on the side of the United States in particular, and that has translated on the ground in Syria as well.
What do you think comes next for Syria?
I think for now we are going to see continued bloodshed and protracted conflict. The regime, like I said, has been making certain gains in certain areas, taking advantage of the fact that it has really a free hand to do whatever it wants. Ever since it signed that chemical weapons agreement with the international community, it's been given effectively leeway to pursue warfare as it pleases. So it will continue to take advantage of that. Backed by Iran and Hezbollah and a multitude of Iraqi Shiite militias on its side, as well as the Russians. But, you know, it's just taking bite by bite at this point, inch by inch, as opposed to sort of a massive, decisive battle that tilts the whole momentum to its favor. So I think we're going to continue this kind of dragged out, grueling, bloody process that we've been seeing for the last 3 years, unfortunately.
Okay. Tony Bedran of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thanks for your time, sir.
My pleasure.
The Islamic Jihad group is agreeing to a ceasefire tonight. That after firing more rockets today into southern Israel. The militant group began their attack Wednesday just as the British Prime Minister visited the area to promote peace. Julie Stahl has that story from Jerusalem.
Islamic Jihad terrorists, backed by Iran, launched dozens of rockets from the heart of Gaza on Wednesday. It marked the biggest spike in Gaza rocket fire since 2012. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel wouldn't tolerate terror from the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip.
If there's no calm in the south, there'll be no calm in Gaza, and that's an understatement. I call upon the residents of the south to follow the instructions. The IDF will do its job.
The Israeli Air Force struck nearly 30 terror sites in retaliation for the barrage. The IDF said it targeted infrastructure terrorists use for training, planning, and carrying out attacks. More than 60 rockets fell inside Israel, including at least 5 that exploded in populated areas but caused no injuries. Several rockets were intercepted by the Iron Dome anti-rocket system. Islamic Jihad, which is armed by Iran, claimed it fired the rockets in retaliation for the deaths of 3 of its members, killed earlier this week in an Israeli airstrike. The IDF released this video. It says clearly shows those 3 terrorists launching a mortar shell at Israeli soldiers and running from the site. Visiting British Prime Minister David Cameron says his country stands with Israel on security matters.
Let me be absolutely clear about these attacks from Gaza. We condemn them completely. They are a reminder, once again, of the importance of maintaining and securing Israel's future and the security threats that you face. And you have Britain's support in facing those security threats.
Cameron is here on a 30-hour visit in part to promote the U.S.-sponsored Israeli-Palestinian peace talks. Netanyahu said there can only be genuine peace if Iranian-backed terrorists can't fire rockets at Israel. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Iran is calling the recent shackling of American pastor Saeed Abedini a mistake. Pastor Saeed is imprisoned there for his faith. The American Center for Law and Justice reports he was recently taken from his jail to a hospital for much-needed medical treatment. But instead of receiving help, he was shackled and not given any care. The ACLJ says the international outcry over Pastor Saeed's treatment made Iran remove the shackles. For more on Pastor Saeed and how you can help call for his release, visit our website, cbnnews.com.
Well, Russia is gathering thousands of troops at the border with Ukraine, calling the move practice for combat missions. The Russian defense minister says about 10,000 troops are involved, along with various rocket launchers, tanks, and other weapons. The so-called military exercise comes as the fate of the Ukraine peninsula or Crimea is still unclear. On Sunday, voters will decide whether to remain part of Ukraine or to split and join Russia. Meanwhile, Western countries are warning Russia it will face backlash if it doesn't back down in Ukraine.
More questions tonight over that missing Malaysian plane. Search crews are expanding their territory. That as U.S. officials announced they think the flight was in the air hours after checking in at its last known location. Heather Sells has more.
Investigators now believe that the missing Malaysian plane may have flown for 5 hours. That's 4 more than they first thought. The Wall Street Journal reports the clue is based on data automatically transmitted from the Boeing's engines.
This latest lead raises all kinds of new questions about who and why someone on board may have diverted the plane, and it also expands the search area again. If the plane flew for 4 more hours after last making contact, that is an extra 2,200 nautical miles.
But Malaysia's acting defense minister denies that the engine data shows an extra 4 hours of flight.
Those reports are inaccurate. The last transmission from the aircraft was at 0107, which indicated that everything was normal.
Authorities have been searching for 6 days now with nothing to show. Today, planes checked out an area where Chinese satellite images showed possible debris, but they found nothing. Malaysian authorities are facing tough questions for their handling of the investigation. At times, they've issued conflicting and confusing statements. For families of the missing passengers, the wait is excruciating.
There is no news whatsoever. It's just disappeared off the face of the earth. And if we could just find some wreckage or something, would be a help, probably, but not this.
American experts from the National Transportation Safety Board and the Federal Aviation Administration have now joined the investigation after being shut out for days. So far, authorities have not ruled out any possible cause. That includes mechanical failure, pilot error, sabotage, and terrorism. Heather Sell, CBN News.
Coming up, CBN News sits down with Arizona's headline-making governor, Jan Brewer.
Catholic groups in Oklahoma have filed a new class action lawsuit to block portions of Obamacare's contraception mandate. The Catholic Benefits Association is a group of nearly 200 Catholic employers. They want to stop the mandate, forcing employers to provide health insurance coverage for birth control and abortion-inducing drugs. Catholic leaders say those practices violate church teaching. Catholic churches are already exempt from the mandate, but Catholic businesses are not.
Arizona Governor Jan Brewer will retire at the end of this term. The announcement ends months of speculation over a possible challenge to constitutionally mandated term limits in the state. And although she won't be fighting for a third term, Brewer isn't known for backing down from what she believes. David Brody has more.
Governor Jan Brewer isn't afraid to take a stand, and that's led to a number of political enemies, from abortion to immigration.
Jan Brewer, what she's doing in Arizona is un-American.
Her enemy list has also helped her become a conservative superhero across the country.
When you hear that phrase, what goes through your mind?
Well, it's unbelievable to me. I think that they say that, and I think then they expect so much from me that sometimes I feel like I can't live up to their expectations.
She's lived up to expectations by putting her governor's signature on a number of conservative causes. For example, the Bible can now be taught in high school history courses. She eliminated domestic partner benefits for state employees. She balanced the budget through tough budget cuts, and even brought back the state Christmas tree. Then there's abortion. Dozens of pro-life bills have been made law, including banning most abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy and defunding Planned Parenthood.
You know, it wasn't tough, really, for me, because I believe in what I believe. I believe in the right to life.
Brewer's toughest fight came over immigration and went to the Supreme Court. The famous Senate Bill 1070 allows Arizona law enforcement to check the immigration status of anyone during routine stops. Critics call it racial profiling, while proponents see it as enforcing U.S. immigration policy. The court held up that part of the law.
The signing of a Senate Bill 1070 was a very difficult time for me personally, because I knew immediately, although we monitored the bill and amended the bill in the legislature, that it was going to be a lightning rod. However, I didn't know or realize at the time just how big of a lightning rod it was going to be. Many a night I would sit on my patio and think, you know, Jesus, hold my hand. You know, you got me here, now you've got to get me through all of this.
She relied on that divine dependence often.
Of course, your faith, I'm sure, must have gotten you through many of those tough times, including John, your son, who passed in 2007 of cancer. What was that like, and how did you deal with it, especially from a faith perspective?
God has always gotten me through it. He's never ever let me down. Sometimes I haven't always understood why he has done things and why things happen, but I know that God has a plan, and he has opened up so many doors for me, and he's given me a shield on so many occasions where I thought the whole world was going to fall apart around me, and I'd be standing there alone.
Nobody knows exactly what the future holds for Jan Brewer, but she plans to continue moving on the only way she knows how.
I got involved in politics because I believed that I could make a difference, and my mother always told me that as you go through life, no matter what you do or how you do it, you leave a little footprint, and that's your legacy.
David Brody, CBN News in Phoenix, Arizona.
Up next, find out what you can do to protect yourself from cyber terrorism.
Well, this age of high technology we live in means a new style of warfare.
Yeah, attacks on our economy and our finances by computers. Dale Hurd explains.
America faces more terrorist attacks, but not the kind you expect. Cyber terrorists are poised to launch a massive assault on the U.S. economy. That's the conclusion of security expert Kevin Freeman. He says they've done it before, and he says the signs are in place that they can do it again, hurting the finances of ordinary Americans, in their retirement accounts, mortgages, and savings. But he also says you don't need to panic. You can be prepared. In his new book, Game Plan, Freeman lays out some basic steps people can take to withstand the coming storm.
And for more on this, our Ephraim Graham recently spoke with Kevin Freeman about protecting yourself against cyber terrorism. Take a look.
What are some of these threats we face?
Well, there are three of them that are major. One of them would be a cyber attack. So someone would hack into the systems and cause them to stop working. Second one would be an EMP, electromagnetic pulse attack. That's where you would basically wipe out our electric grid and any instruments that use computer chips. The third one would be somehow to crash our dollar by dumping bonds. The Chinese or the Russians could dump all their holdings of U.S. bonds, and they literally put us in the poorhouse.
What needs to be done to protect our financial systems?
Number one, we need to build resiliency, which means we've got to have the capability of bringing it back up quickly if it goes down. That's in the case of a cyber attack, which means lots of backups, lots of systems. The NSA is working on that. In the event of an EMP, we've got to protect our electric grid. We've got to increase the transformer protection. You can do that. It costs a little bit of money, but we haven't done that yet. And in the case of our debt, we need to get out of it. We need to reduce our debt, stop spending crazily as we've been doing.
Let's talk about attacks on the power grid. What effect would that have on our financial system?
Well, if we have no electricity, it not only ruins the financial, you can't get money from an ATM, it stops the stock market from working, but worse than that, you don't get access to medicine, you don't have access to water, you can't get gasoline for your car because the gasoline pumps run on electricity. So we're very dependent on electricity. In fact, the EMP Commission projected that within 6 months or so, a large percentage of the U.S. population would die if we lost electricity. We're that dependent on the electric grid.
How vulnerable is the power grid?
It's very vulnerable. A year ago, some terrorists broke into a substation outside of Silicon Valley, and they took AK-47s and shot it up and almost caused a blackout for Silicon Valley. And the problem with the power grid is if one segment goes down, it can cascade into failures across the country. I mean, a tree can fall on a power line and cause a blackout. If transformers are wiped out, we can't replace those transformers for 2 or 3 years because of the length of time it takes to get these specialized equipment.
In terms of threats from the outside, how likely is it that Iran will be able to carry out such an attack on us?
Well, the Iranians have computer hackers. The supreme leader of Iran showed forth a whole school full of hackers that are destined to bring down the great Satan, which is us, is what he said. But they could also launch a really crude nuclear device over the continental United States, explode it in the stratosphere above Columbus, Ohio, for example, and that would send out an electromagnetic pulse that would wipe out our electric grid. Could they do it? They have the capabilities to do it. North Korea has the capabilities. Russia, China, they could all do it. The question is, will they be able to pull it off, and will they want to do it? And hopefully neither of those is true, but they certainly have the capability.
Hearing that they have the capability, what can be done to protect the grid at this point?
Well, we could back up the grid. We could put just some minor modifications that would allow larger voltage to go across the lines and not destroy the transformers. We could do that for a relatively small cost. We could also put in a missile defense system, something that would stop a launch over the United States. We actually have no radar capability to watch a launch from the Gulf of Mexico right now.
All right, well, up next, after 10 years of waiting, this couple finally got their daughter, but in a very unique way. One Washington state couple had always wanted to be parents, but after 10 years with no success, they were beginning to accept that it just wouldn't happen.
That's until they heard about something known as snowflakes. The DeVores discovered a unique agency that takes frozen embryos created by couples for their own in vitro fertilization. The agency then matches those snowflake embryos with a new couple. The DeVores adopted an embryo, a little girl they named CJ.
Right away, she held on to Matt's finger.
Just tell her everything. You know, she may not understand it all, but so that she grows up with it, so it's never a shock or something that it's a secret.
There are hundreds of thousands of frozen embryos in storage banks in the U.S. And while most embryo donations are anonymous, Snowflakes encourages open communication between the families.
Did you see those cute fat cheeks on that little girl?
Just want to squeeze them, don't you?
I did a story on Snowflakes years ago, and it's just an amazing program, and that's going to do it for this edition of NewsWatch.
Yeah, thanks for watching. Have a great night.